Have you ever used phrases such as sold down the river, uppity, or master bedroom without considering their origins? You're not alone, but here's the thing. Some of the most common phrases in our everyday language are rooted in racism, slavery, and white supremacy. And most of us were never taught where they really came from. Welcome to another episode of Aggressive Intelligence. We're pulling back the curtain on the hidden racist history behind words and phrases we hear all the time. They may sound innocent now, but many of them were born out of oppression, whether it was mocking African traditions, excluding black people from voting, or celebrating slavery-era violence. This isn't about canceling words, it's about understanding the history hidden in plain sight. Because if we don't know where our language comes from, we risk repeating the very ideas that kept people oppressed for centuries. Let's break it down, one phrase at a time. Did you know the phrase mumbo-jumbo has racist roots? The term comes from the Mandingo, or Mandinka people of West Africa. In the 18th century, British colonizers and writers like Francis Moore and later Mungo Park described a figure known as Mama Jambu, a masked male dancer or spiritual figure used in ceremonies to enforce community rules and resolve disputes. But European colonizers didn't try to understand the cultural or religious context. Instead, they mocked it and reduced it to nonsense. They mocked it and turned mumbo-jumbo into a joke. As these distorted accounts spread in Europe, mumbo-jumbo became a catch-all term used by colonizers to describe African rituals they didn't understand, spiritual beliefs they deemed primitive, any non-European culture they wanted to dismiss. So over time, mumbo-jumbo entered English to mean meaningless nonsense or gibberish, especially when talking about religion, politics, or ceremony. People still say mumbo-jumbo casually. I don't believe in all that mumbo-jumbo, without knowing it originated as a way to mock African spiritual practices. Ever heard the phrase fuzzy wuzzy? It's got a racist past. Fuzzy wuzzy was a term used by British soldiers in the late 1800s during colonial wars in Sudan, especially the Mahdist War. It referred to the Hadendoa people, a subgroup of the Beja, known for their distinctive tightly curled hairstyles. British poet Rudyard Kipling even wrote a poem titled Fuzzy Wuzzy in 1892, praising their bravery in battle, but in a patronizing, colonial way. So even when Kipling was complimenting them, it was through a lens of racial superiority, reducing them to exoticized natives. Later, the phrase was turned into a children's rhyme. Fuzzy Wuzzy was a bear, Fuzzy Wuzzy had no hair. While the bear rhyme seems innocent today, it erases the colonial roots and masks a history of racial mockery. Most people today use the bear rhyme without knowing the background, but understanding where it came from helps us recognize how racism can hide in plain sight, even in childhood rhymes. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Sounds innocent, right? But the original version? Not so innocent. The version many people grew up reciting goes, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch a tiger by the toe. But originally it was, catch a N-word by the toe. If he hollers, let him go. It was a rhyme passed down during slavery and Jim Crow, normalizing racism through children's games. As attitudes began to shift during the civil rights era, tiger replaced the slur in most versions. But the damage was done. Using the rhyme today without understanding its origin erases that history, and risks continuing a painful legacy. Today people say things like, she's so uppity, he's acting too uppity. It sounds like just another word for arrogant or stuck up. But when used against black people, especially historically, it meant something far more sinister. During the late 1800s and throughout the 1900s, white Southerners often called black people uppity when they dressed too well, spoke with confidence, demanded respect, challenged segregation or racism, didn't know their place. In other words, uppity meant a black person was acting like they were equal to white people, and that was seen as a threat. Calling a black person uppity wasn't just an insult, it was often a precursor to violence. Many lynchings, beatings, and attacks happened because a black man or woman was seen as getting too uppity. For example, black veterans returning from war who wore their uniforms proudly were often targeted for being uppity. Today, people use uppity without always knowing its history, but when it's used toward black people, it still carries that ugly coded meaning from the past. Grandfathered in. Sounds harmless, right? Nowadays, people use it to mean someone is exempt from a new rule because they were already doing something before the change. Example, I got grandfathered in at the old price. After the 15th Amendment gave black men the right to vote in 1870, Southern states passed laws to stop them, without violating the Constitution outright. So they created literacy tests, poll taxes, and property requirements, all designed to block black voters. But there was a problem. Those same rules would have blocked poor and uneducated white men too. Southern states added a rule that said, if your grandfather could vote before the Civil War, you don't have to take the literacy test. That meant white men were grandfathered in. Black men, whose grandfathers were enslaved and couldn't vote, were excluded. Today it means you're exempt from a new rule, but the phrase is rooted in racism and voter suppression. Next time you hear grandfathered in, remember where it really came from. If you're finding this deep dive into common phrases rooted in racism, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Aggressive Intelligence for more factual explorations of critical historical events. Your support helps us continue to uncover these vital stories. You've heard it before, no comments from the peanut gallery. Today, people use it casually to mean unwanted opinions from the sidelines. No comments from the peanut gallery. It sounds harmless, but it wasn't always. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, during the height of Jim Crow segregation, theaters had separate seating. The cheapest, worst seats were called the peanut gallery. That's where black people and poor people were forced to sit, usually in the upper balconies, farthest from the stage. They were called the peanut gallery because peanuts were the cheapest snack. And audience members in those sections were known to throw peanuts at performers, especially during racist minstrel shows. Calling someone the peanut gallery implied their opinion didn't matter. They were low class or disruptive, and it carried the weight of racial and social exclusion. So when you say quiet down peanut gallery, it echoes a time when black voices were literally pushed to the back of the room and mocked for speaking up. Ever say that was a cakewalk to mean something was easy? Most people use it to describe something simple or effortless. That test was a cakewalk. They won that game in a cakewalk. But the truth? The phrase began as a mockery of black people by white audiences, after originally being created by enslaved black people themselves. The cakewalk was a dance created by enslaved black people in the 19th century. It began as a way to mock the stiff, formal dances of white slave owners, with exaggerated high steps, bows, and struts. Slave owners didn't realize they were being mocked and began hosting contests for who could do the best dance. The prize? Often a cake, which is how it got its name, cakewalk. After slavery, the cakewalk was co-opted by white performers in blackface during minstrel shows. They exaggerated the dance to mock black people as foolish or overly proud. What started as a clever form of resistance and humor became another tool of white supremacy and racist entertainment. The cakewalk was never just a dance. It was resistance turned into ridicule and a joke stolen from those who created it. Ever wonder why it's called the master bedroom? It's commonly used in real estate to describe the largest bedroom in a house, typically with a private bathroom. But the word master carries a lot of historical baggage, especially in the United States. On plantations during slavery, the master was the enslaver, the person who owned and controlled enslaved black people. The master's quarters, or master's house, was a literal place of domination, violence, and white supremacy. So when modern homes started using terms like master bedroom, it echoed the language of ownership and control, particularly uncomfortable in a country built on the legacy of slavery. In recent years, many real estate companies began phasing out the term and replacing it with primary bedroom, owner's suite, main bedroom. Some platforms like Zillow and Redfin now avoid master bedroom entirely. Today, people say, he got sold down the river, to mean someone was betrayed or abandoned. But most don't realize that this phrase comes from one of the darkest chapters of American slavery. In the early 1800s, enslaved people in the Upper South, like Kentucky or Virginia, were often sold down the Mississippi River to the Deep South, especially to places like Mississippi and Louisiana. Why? Because the Deep South had a booming cotton economy and a brutal demand for labor. And those plantations were notoriously harsher, with higher death rates and backbreaking conditions. Being sold down the river was one of the worst possible fates for an enslaved person, often meaning they'd never see their family again. White Americans eventually started using the phrase to describe betrayal, but stripped it of its original meaning. They turned a phrase about human trafficking and generational trauma into a casual way to say, "I got screwed over." Sold Down the River isn't just about betrayal. It's about the commodification of black bodies and the violence of the slave trade. There's a popular myth that picnic comes from the phrase, "pick a N-word," referring to gatherings where white mobs would select a black person to lynch during a public event. The term picnic comes from the French word pique-nique, first used in the 1600s, which meant a social meal where everyone contributed food, usually held outdoors. It entered the English language in the 18th century, long before lynching events became widespread in the US South. Even though the word itself didn't come from lynching, the association is historically valid. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, lynchings of black people in the American South often became public events. Families would gather with food. Photographs of lynchings were turned into postcards. These gruesome scenes were treated like entertainment, while people ate and socialized. Picnic is not a racist word in origin, but the history of picnics being held during racist violence is real and painful. The truth is, language isn't just about words. It's about power, history, and memory. Many of these phrases didn't start off innocent. They were born from slavery, segregation, and colonialism. And they've survived, hidden in everyday conversation. But now you know. And once you know, you can't unhear it. So the next time someone casually says cakewalk or peanut gallery, pause, ask questions, share the truth. If you found this video eye-opening, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And drop a comment below with any other phrases you've heard that might have hidden histories. This is Aggressive Intelligence, where we expose what they tried to keep buried. See you in the next one.